Hello, I just want to just confirm with everyone on the Zoom, if you can please rename yourself to your name correctly, please, and organization. So if you are on the Zoom, please rename yourself with your name and organization, if applicable. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's convene our. See if that's better. Yep. Same thing yesterday. Go ahead and get started and we'll convene our meeting for today for the Government Oversight Committee in conjunction with the Education Committee. And let me start by asking if there are any comments from the chairs of the committees. Representative Dave.
Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. We kick off our legislative session next week, so things are getting busy, schedules are filling up, and there's a lot of things going on this afternoon. So you may see members coming in and out. So please understand this is being recorded on CTN, so folks can watch it or listen later if they're not able to participate in the full meeting. But let's get started. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Dathan. Do our ranking members have any comments? Any comments?
Thank you. Just looking forward to it, and let's get started.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. So let's get started. If I can ask the auditors of public accounts. Oh, Representative Carter, did you have any comments? Right. Representative Carney, if you have any,
No comments. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So if I can ask the auditors of public accounts to come forward, and if you can, either you have a whole team, so if you can introduce yourselves as you're speaking. Thank you.
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm John Garagosian, one of the state auditors. And I know we're here today to talk about special education audit. I want to give a little background on how we got to this point and how we started doing this audit work. This audit work was established in 3 public acts. Public Act 15-5 required our office to conduct audit of approved and non-approved special education providers meeting certain criteria. It was based on the findings of the Moore Commission, which is something that former Speaker Brendan Sharkey was very much involved with. And those audit duties are reflected in sections 290I and 1091G of the general statutes. The act also required new requirements on the State Department of Education, local boards of education, private special education providers, and regional education service centers. At the time, it required us to audit every single private education provider at least every 7 years. And obviously, we had some capacity issues doing that. So in response to that, Public Act 17-173 allowed our office to conduct special education audits as often as we deem necessary using a risk-based analysis or approach. It removed the requirement that our audit our office audit the same number of SDE approved and non-approved providers. Instead, it specified that our office must audit both types of providers. It required boards of education and private providers to provide our auditors with information deemed necessary to conduct this work. And it provided our office authority to audit school districts to ensure they are monitoring student attendance, service delivery, and cost at private special education schools. And then as a result of the first group of these audits, Public Act 18-183, I think is one of the most important pieces of legislation in terms of putting our audit work into law. And that piece of legislation required an agreement or contract between the local board and the private provider to include an explanation of how the tuition costs or costs for services will be calculated. And it required a contract that, and oftentimes before this act, they were using the IEP as the contract, but the act required them to use other factors related to that. And it also required the State Department of Education to create documentation standards. So we think that was an important act in this space. To date, we released 8 reports in this subject matter since 2017. Some of the early ones included we issued an interim report, and basically in our response to the law as it was written, we released an audit on the State Department of Education's approval process of private education programs and oversight of non-approved programs. We reduced the report on monitoring of contracts or other arrangements between local and regional boards of education and private providers. And then we issued 5 reports which look at specific schools, as we did in this one we're talking about today. So related to today's audit, the purpose of the audit was to look at whether these providers spent state and local special education funds in accordance with contracts and student IEPs, whether they adequately delivered related services, whether they engaged in key management practices to deliver quality special education. That's okay. Tell Dennis I said that. So in this case, we audited four providers approved by the State Department of Education and 1 non-approved provider. The report, and I represented David, this took 3,792 hours to conduct this audit, and it included 22 findings and recommendations. We're in the field currently on a 2024 audit, which gets into some of the local oversight of these special education providers. And the objectives of that audit are to evaluate the sufficiency and effectiveness of local education agency oversight activities for students placed in private providers programs. Evaluate the sufficiency of Connecticut's statutory and regulatory framework for local education agency oversight of students placed in private providers. And it seeks to determine whether individual private providers of special education are charging different rates to different local education agencies for the same educational and related services. As always, it's valuable for you to hear from our frontline auditors who do the work. So I'm happy to introduce them. As I said at the last hearing, they're going to answer all the difficult and detailed questions, and Craig and I are going to do something else.
Out of the way.
But I first want to introduce somebody that before Deputy State Auditor Lisa Daly. Lisa's worked for our office for over 30 years, and she's our deputy in charge of all of our audit work. She's led numerous audits, including the Department of Labor, the Green Bank, the Treasury Financial Audit, the Workers' Compensation Commission, and Connecticut Innovations. Prior to being the deputy, she was one of our division heads. Administrative Auditor Maura Pardo is also here. She's an administrative auditor and oversees our performance audit unit. She's been with our office for 29 years. and she also oversees our whistleblower process. She also oversees these special education audits, the State Department of Education, Connecticut Technical Schools, State CERC, Office of Early Childhood, and a lot of the Office of Government Accountability and the other oversight agencies. Principal Auditor Dan Dorr, who's the lead auditor on this audit, he's worked in our office for almost 5 years. He's led other performance audit, including the DCD Film Tax Credit Program, the CI Angel Investor Tax Credit Program, and follow-up reports to our protection of the elderly and oversight of assisted living facilities audits. Lastly, Staff Auditor Joseph Belisana. Joe's worked in our office for nearly 3 years, and he spent over 2,300 hours on this particular report. So he's probably the expert. He's got the least amount of time in the office, but he's probably the expert on this audit. He's currently working on that next special education audit. And Joe has worked on numerous whistleblower reviews for our office. In his prior life, he also helped Palm Beach County Youth Services obtain department-wide certification of a trauma-informed care model. So I'm going to turn it over to Craig for whatever he wants to say.
As I said earlier, hopefully we'll stay out of the way. I do think having our staff here really provides both committees an opportunity to ask specific questions and tell you how they came about their analysis. I was saying to someone in the audience earlier that to me, one of the benefits of being here on this type of an audit for me is that it's really compact. Unlike some of the larger agencies that we audit that have a very broad responsibility requirement, this is really rather defined. And so it's no surprise to me that these types of audits provide the legislature with good information to make legislative changes if they feel they're necessary. So it's easy to target a problem easier to target a problem this way, and you usually don't need to have an awful lot of agreement on how much it's going to cost. So happy to be here and look forward to the responses.
Thank you so much for all that information and the introductions. It's very helpful, and for you all being here, particularly to answer the questions. Let me just let our two education chairs have joined us. So starting with Senator McCrory, if you want to make any opening comments. So starting with our House Chair, Representative Leeper.
Hey everyone, thanks so much. It's actually such a pleasure to have the opportunity to get these presentations from you. And I hope also feel like that 2,300 hours of work is getting the due diligence and respect it deserves. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity. And I think it's really important for how we build trust with our communities, with our taxpayers, with our students and our families in this case in particular. So I just want to say thank you. And also I'm just going to say I got a little feedback from folks watching online. If maybe you could talk closer to the mic, you're a little quiet and I want to make sure everyone can hear what you have to say. So thank you very much.
And I also want to commend you guys for all the work you do. John, you've been doing this ever since you've been here for a very long time, and we trust your work. Craig, your work is impeccable, and I know you're leading the people the right way. We're looking forward to looking at this audit and looking at things that we can do to make life in the Special Ed Committee more feasible for our constituents. So again, thank you for having us, and we look forward to answering any questions and looking forward to having questions answered. Thank you.
So let me just open up one question, then I let the committee members ask a question. Just when it comes to the local oversight and the contracts that providers have to sort of are under obligations with the local districts, is there any obligation to report when, for example, in the audit, the services that are not meeting the IEPs, or there's a consistent period of time when those services are not being met? Did you see, is there anything in the contractual language that requires that the provider actually report that within a certain period of time to the,
Thank you for that question. I've never been accused of having a soft voice, but if anyone online can't hear me, please let me know and I'll speak up. The contracts vary greatly. You know, there's a lot of variation between, there's quite a few LEAs, quite a few private providers. So they vary, but yes, some of the contracts do have language in them
that require the private providers to provide service documentation on a regular basis to LEAs, and stipulates payment only for services rendered. That's some contracts, not all the contracts. There are several different sort of contractual models that people operate under. Some of them are more a blanket tuition rate. Some of them depend on services rendered. Some of them just depend on services as stipulated in the IEP. So there's a wide variety, but some of the contracts do have language in them that indicates that private providers should be providing service documentation to the LEAs on a regular basis.
Oh, thank you. And is there language also around the certified versus non-certified personnel? I mean, is there an agreement as to when those services are provided, specified who provides that and what qualifications they have? Or are most of them fairly open or not specified in the contract?
Well, they don't specify in the contract, but the contract specifies that they will implement the IEP, and IEPs have to specify who the service provider would be, and that the service provider who has oversight over whatever service delivery that is has to be have the correct type of certification. So that may not be directly in the contract, but it is in the IEP. Now, there is general language in most of the contracts about the private provider, attesting to the fact that all their staff have required certifications, have passed background checks, those types of things. So there is some language sort of more generally attesting to the fact that providers have certified staff.
I believe my good co-chair has some questions on turnover.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. And as a CPA and former auditor myself, I understand what you mean by risk-based approach, but I don't know if everyone out there does. So if you could please talk about how you pick the sample of people to look at and what that actually means and why these 4 were selected.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will just clarify that, we have multiple selection processes within the audit. So we had one process we used to select the private providers we would look at, other processes we used to select the staff members we audited, the students we audited. So this is specifically to choosing the private providers that we selected for the audit. So when we say it's a risk-based approach, what we mean by that is we try to consider factors that increase the likelihood that various important factors might be at play. So dollars, what is the dollar amount involved? How many students are outplaced? Those are the 2 large ones. So we want to know that, while all private providers, while all students, merit a close eye, we have limited resources and want to look where we think we might find the most concerns potentially. And so we tend to look on all of these audits at the larger schools who have more students from LEAs. They involve more state dollars, either through excess cost reimbursement grants that are given to the LEAs. And so that's primarily what we meant. In addition to that, we did some, we looked at the largest, the ones that had the most money. Amongst those, we looked for various news articles, things like that, because so this audit included the objective about looking at management practices. That wasn't in previous audits. And so we perused some of the news articles and things to try to identify schools where there may have been publicity about, negative events. And so we generated a pool of probably about 12, I think, private providers. We did some more digging on those private providers to see if there were any other risks related to management practices that we might consider. And then we talked to SDE to sort of say, of these, are there any that have surfaced on your end that might be wise for us to include in our sample? And so it was really a combination of those factors that allowed us to come to the selection we did of the four APSEPs in this case and 1 non-approved private provider.
So materiality does play a big part there. So thank you.
Yes.
Overall, I just want to remind folks, and this is the 2022 and 2023. I think Auditor Garagosian mentioned that. So height of COVID, there's a lot of challenges, particularly with a student base, it has more needs than the traditional student base. So just to remind folks of that. One of the findings in number one, you highlighted the private provider and the combined number of actual services contracted that were delivered. And then there was, and we'll kind of get in with each of the individual providers shortly. But one of the comments here was around that, for a couple of these providers, you couldn't substantiate, were they not cooperative, or what was the issue on why we couldn't find out more, and was information maybe delivered later, or how did that work?
Yeah, happy to clarify that. And I do want to say, all of the providers in this audit were good partners, and we appreciate them for that. We know that often our auditees put their heart and soul into their work, and it can be very difficult to have outside eyes come in and start poking around. So we always appreciate when folks partner with us well, and all of these providers did. So that wasn't the issue. One of the issues with one of the providers was that their documentation system had changed. And so they physically weren't able to provide us with documentation for the audit period. They gave us some documentation, bits and pieces that they had. They also provided us with some documentation for the following school year to show us what their documentation looked like, subsequent to the new system, is my understanding. But the number of documents we had to review were so few that I don't think it would have been fair or representative to take those few documents, calculate a number from it, and go, they delivered 20%, because we may have been looking at 2 documents instead of 30. So, what we did see were similar patterns where there were missed service delivery, but we really didn't feel comfortable that we had sufficient and appropriate evidence to come up with an exact figure. And the same was true with the other provider. When we visited them on site was when we reviewed their service documentation, and they were operating on a reduced staff budget, and they were staffing at that time, and they just literally couldn't access some of the records we required. So we had to go from some summary records, which were less detailed, but also painted a picture of, pretty significant gaps in service delivery.
So when there was a gap, did you also share those sort of initial findings before the report came out with SDE to find out if they had maybe a similar experience when dealing with these private providers?
So we shared all of the findings with SDE prior to release. Part of that, we have an obligation to ensure that they review it for confidentiality matters, to make sure that we're not inadvertently including any personally identifiable student information. But they also review it, to help us make sure that there aren't any obvious errors they may see. So I can't speak to as whether or not, they saw similar things, or they had, what their reaction was to that. But I know that they were provided with a copy. They reviewed that. They provided some feedback to us. And I know in their comments in the report, they were concerned with several of the findings we identified as well.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm going to let others have a chance. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Dathan. Do our chairs of education want to, any questions? Representative Lieber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Was there any look back, or maybe accounting for the uniqueness of being in 2022, 2023? So things that may have been addressed since that time period, or findings that maybe were out of compliance specifically because of COVID unique challenges. And I apologize if actually that's specifically addressed in here.
Yeah, it's not specifically addressed. I think that obviously there were still ongoing challenges. What we heard from, providers was that their biggest challenges, and, at least this is what they share with us anecdotally, was during shutdown. Staff weren't available, students were not available to come to school, and for many in this population that served, that presented significant challenges and difficulties for students and for staff and teachers. Now, we certainly would assume there was some lingering challenges. There's, I think, staffing shortages in terms of teachers that has never really recovered from COVID. I'm not an expert on that. I'm sure SDE could speak to that better, but we certainly heard from providers that, there were many times they were struggling to get certified staff. And so that may be partially linked to COVID. We didn't sort of, consider the impacts of COVID specifically within our findings. However, the private providers were, given the opportunity to comment and respond to our findings. And so, if they felt that some of our findings were related to COVID issues, I'm sure that they would have highlighted that. Or I shouldn't say that. I would anticipate they would have highlighted that. And I know at least one or two responses, I think, talked about some service delivery changes that happened as a result of COVID, and that accounted for some of the lack of documentation. So there may have been some cases where it was a documentation issue versus a true service delivery issue, and sometimes it's hard for us to separate those out. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, it was a great answer, and I'm realizing, and maybe just like a foreshadowing for our school folks when it's your turn, to be able to respond to what was unique challenge of COVID or not related to COVID, and I guess what's been done since 22-23 when these findings were first discovered. Thank you.
I just had a quick question in regards to the differences between the approved private providers and the approved private. Did you see anything significantly different in between the ones that have been approved by SDE and the ones are not? I see right here, and I know you have a small sample size. You only use one non-provider, which is the university, and you only use 3 of the providers. So, have there any significant differences between the two?
Well, certainly. So right, we only looked at one, so it's hard to see. I wouldn't want to characterize them as significant differences that apply to all non-approved providers. However, non-approved providers do not have the same. They're not subject to the same types of oversight that approved providers are, and so you could see in our report, we found there to be cases where there were less certified staff that were delivering educational services to students, and there really was no statutory or regulatory requirement that those staff be certified, because there's no oversight authority over that. So the lack of oversight presents challenges, I would say, to anyone who would want to have reassurance that things are operating well at a non-approved private provider, because they don't have the same level of accountability to the approval standards that APCEPs have. And all of the findings that we have in our report that specifically refer to the non-approved provider, the reason they're separate is because for those circumstances, those weren't compliance standards, because there's nothing for them to be compliant to. So we applied sort of a best practice approach to the non-approved and identified gaps and issues. There's a couple of exceptions. The legislation around background checks still applies to private providers. So even though they are not subject to oversight, they do have to have the same background checks that public schools do. And I believe they would have the same restrictions on the use of emergency restraint and seclusion, because that's tied to a number of statutory and federal regulations.
Thank you.
Are there other questions from our? I don't. Oh, Rep. Carney, do you have a question?
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you for the audit. My only question is really around the failure finding one, because that's pretty much the biggest reason for these private providers is to deliver those services. I guess I'm curious. How did you come to these percentages for the schools that were listed, where there was information for these schools?
Yeah, sure. So we really started with the IEP. So we had a student sample for each private provider. We took the IEP for each student and specified what services they were supposed to receive and the amounts of services. Most of the IEPs stipulate, a certain amount of hours per week is the standard approach. So, we were able to kind of document what they should be receiving over the course of the school calendar. We then requested and received service documentation from the private providers. And we went through and recorded all the incidents of service provision that were documented in their documentation to us. We then added that, calculated a percentage for each student for each type of service. So for each student we have identified in our sample, we know that, student one received X percentage of this service and X percentage of that service. We then took that and averaged the percentage across each student in that private provider for that particular service. So, when you look at the percentage delivered by a private provider of occupational therapy, that is the average percentage when you looked at all the students that we audited that received occupational therapy for the audit period. And we did that for each student and each private provider, and then averaged those percentages to sort of get the overall average of 90%, 60%, whatever that sort of final average that we listed is.
Okay. So do you think, part of this is it that they're just not documenting it appropriately, not documenting at all, or they're just not doing it? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I could share, that our assumption is, so the standard we used was that IEPs specify a certain level of service delivery, and contracts stipulate that the private provider will deliver the IEP. So we took that number that's stipulated as the criteria. I think it's reasonable to expect that there are some cases where there are going to be missed services that are, in the best case scenario, you might not hit 100%. And that's even with efforts. We saw efforts of providers trying to make up sessions. We could see that in the documentation that they may have missed sessions in one month, made up sessions in another month. We could tell that sometimes that was noted in the actual notes themselves. Other times we could just see that in virtue of the number of hours in one month versus the number of hours in the next month. So I think there certainly are legitimate reasons why students miss some of their services. In particular, there are things you would expect: absences of students, absences of the staff who deliver those services. Some students, have very challenging needs and may refuse service. They may not be, in a position to receive service for a reason related to their particular disability for a given session. So there are certainly reasons why there were missed services, and we know that there were some missed services. Were there also some services that may have been given and then just not documented properly? Probably so. We can't really ascertain that. We know that at least one provider did speak to that in their response, indicating that because of circumstances, they had expanded their service delivery modes in ways that maybe didn't get reflected in their documentation. And so there may have been a little bit of a disconnect between the documentation and the actual service delivered. I will say that like in all our reports, our auditees have a chance to respond. And so I would look at their responses toward their responses to see to what degree they felt that their gaps in service delivery were the result of, challenges in service delivery versus documentation issues. Because we wouldn't have looked at that or have any way to right? We can't verify that a document doesn't exist, but a service happened. So that's not something that we would be able to document.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for all your work on this.
Representative Zupkis.
Thank you. I guess mine is more of a comment. First of all, thank you for these. I really like them. And for me, it's the follow-up of what we do with the information that you've given us. And so as I just look through, just as an example, like in finding 7 insufficient mitigation of risk related to criminal background checks and who did and who did not. Insufficient training documents, who has that and who does not. So the IEP, all of that, I think it's important for us to take this back and do something with it to ensure that our system gets better and not stays where it is or loses any ground. So thank you. That was it.
Sorry, Brian, the mic does not seem to. Oh, all right, there we go. Sorry. Okay. Just one more question. I don't see any other questions from. Is there a question in there, Representative Johnson? Sorry, I can't see you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your work and your presentation here. Inconsistent, finding 3, where you go into inconsistent contract quality and specificity. Are there things that we could do legislatively that would help us with specificity? And it's kind of also goes to a question I have about the level of care. At what point is the level of care requiring too much in terms of the contracts that are specified that we're looking at now between the local school district and the provider? I just wondered if you have some ideas about that.
Well, I wondered
Thank
if you
you.
could just clarify what you mean by sort of the care piece, like what, yeah.
Sure. So there are people that have special needs that have all different ranges of need.
Mhm.
Some are completely bedbound or have, real service requirements that maybe go beyond this specificity in terms of what could be done in a school setting, in more of a, interactive setting. Whereas there may be people who are bedbound, still very, very young. But is there anything where you're looking at the contracts between the state and, well, that's required by the state, but between the town and the provider that exclude them or give more requirements for them to help out with placement, those kinds of things?
I don't
Does
think.
that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Let me try answering, and if I don't hit it on the mark, you could follow up. So I think that the contracts are really in some ways neutral to the need of the student because they really are the business end of the IEP. So the IEP is where all the specificity is going to be addressed about the student's needs, how they can be met, what's required to meet those needs. It connects the various educational interventions as well as the related services to educational goals. And so I think what you're talking about, any of those needs that might be addressed and how they'd be addressed would be tackled in the IEP. And then the contract is layered on top of that to more or less hold both parties in agreement that, we're sending the student here and these people will provide the services. So from what I take to be your question, the contracts wouldn't really have much leverage there. It would really be the IEP in terms of how the IEP could specify and address the student's needs. I'm not sure if that helps.
Yeah, it helps me, think about the process and what we should be looking at, I think.
Yeah.
I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding that everybody can be addressed in these kinds of, this analysis, whereas there are people that are in have bigger needs than
Right.
what can be addressed in these kinds of situations. So
Yeah.
thank you for that. And
Yeah.
thank you for your work. Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
and I will answer the other piece. What could be done to improve the contracting question. I know we're not the only ones who have made a recommendation about maybe having a model contract or some additional guidance from SDE. It's a challenge because the schools are different, the private providers are different. So even if you have a model contract, there's going to be some I would assume, desire for LEAs and private providers to negotiate on some of the details. But, you know, it might be helpful to have a little more guidance about elements and specific wording that might be helpful to include in the contract around things like service documentation, around things like how do you properly reference the IEP within the contract so that you are meeting the statutory requirement for cost reimbursement grants. So I think there are pieces of language that could be provided that would help tighten up the contracts. I don't think it's going to solve, you know, every challenge that people have in contracting. That's just the nature, I think, of contracting. But I do think there are some pieces that might help.
What about the idea of when you take a look at other types of levels of care? So when you go to a hospital certification, skilled nursing facility certification, or home care certification on a different level. When we have developmentally disabled, they tend to be in group homes and not no certification in terms of levels of care. And it seems to me that if we did have more analysis in terms of levels of care, that would help us focus on the contractual language. So that's kind of like where I'm going with this, but thank you so
Okay,
much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Representative Khan?
Thank you. So I have a couple questions about the recommendations. So throughout the document, there's some individual recommendations based on each finding. And then at the end of the document, you have prior recommendations. So these you're just adding on to the recommendations that are outlined here, or are just the three at the end kind of the overall or overarching recommendations?
So the prior recommendations we put in there to sort of mirror our departmental process where we, you know, we comment on whether the recommendation is repeated. And so it's a little difficult in this case because we aren't auditing the same people technically, right? And so, but we wanted to highlight that in past audits, we saw some similar issues. They weren't identical, but we had, you know, sort of similar findings related to some of the contracting challenges. And so they are essentially saying several of the recommendations we're making are very similar to recommendations we made in the previous reports for our private, you know, special private provider audits, special education private provider audits. So they're not separate. They are saying that 3 of those findings are similar to findings and recommendations we had in our previous provider audits.
Are they specific to the same schools?
They are not.
They're not.
They're
Okay.
not.
Okay. Is there a way that you keep track of if they were? So for example, if you were to see a finding one year and the next year when you're back, do you ever go to the same school for the same?
We can go to the same school if so the statute's specific that we can't audit the same private provider more than once in 7 years unless we found some specific issue that we felt we needed to, you know, to re-audit. So we don't necessarily go back and revisit a school and do the audit again. And in the past, I don't think we've done follow up on the schools to reach out to them and say, hey, have you adjusted these? In part because we directed the recommendations to SDE as sort of the oversight agency, saying maybe you could, you know, remind them to do this. You could help them with some clarification. We took a different tactic in this audit and tried to make recommendations directly to the providers themselves to address the things we identified. And so that's sort of a departure from our previous private provider audits. So, you know, we haven't really, yeah, there's at this point with these recommendations, there's not really anyone to go back to, you know, when we did this audit.
Okay. And so that was kind of going to be my next question, the follow-up process with recommendations. So aside from the recommendation to CSD, which obviously oversees, there's no follow-up on your end with the provider themselves. That's just not practice.
My best answer to that would be, I think we have to figure that out because this audit is sort of an anomaly. It's not our departmental audits, which have a very specific follow-up process. It's not our performance audits, which have a very specific process. And so this is the first time we've used this audit to make recommendations to private providers. So we're going to have to consider how do we and what's the best way to get some further follow-up or information about whether you know, recommendations were implemented or not.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Representative Daith?
Thank you so much. And I understand this performance audit, but I'm just kind of wondering what you do for work to tie it into the financial aspect. And I'm just wondering, when you have the contracted services for individuals, you tie that back to the service agreement, the IEPs for the performance side of things. But then are you all, as part of your procedures, looking at how you look at billings? So how maybe one of the private providers bills either the district or whoever it needs to bill as part of those services for your, just to ensure completeness?
So, I mean, we certainly consider, billing, analyzing their billing practices was not part of our audit. It wasn't an objective of our audit. In virtue of having looked at their billing and have done the audit work that we did, we certainly saw different approaches to billing. So we don't have any specific findings or our field work that was intentionally designed to evaluate billing processes, but we certainly did find a variety of billing practices through our other field work in terms of trying to reconcile, service delivery with contracts and IEPs.
I guess,
Can I just add, one of the reasons I thought it was important to start looking at the municipal side of this is we want to ensure that municipalities are getting what they're paying for and their students are getting the services they need. So that's why I'm very, this was many steps along the way developing this work. And as the law changed, we actually took a step back for a couple of years to allow that new law to be implemented and to make sure that the providers were adhering to the documentation standards. But I think that's the next horizon. Like cities and towns in the state are paying a lot of money for these services, and we want to make sure the kids are getting the services they need and the towns are getting what they're paying for.
absolutely. And that's where I was going with my question. I mean, trying to understand that, student outcomes are also being reached as part of what's going on, and districts and municipalities are not getting overbilled for services maybe not performed. And so that's what I was probably most concerned around for item number one, as well as the student outcomes.
And I would just add, our challenge as auditors is we don't always have the clinical backgrounds to decide to judge that, but the people that do should be able to do that, whether they be in the local education agencies, the State Department of Education, et cetera.
Okay. And then as part of this, did you look at excess cost and the contribution by each of these private providers when looking at the sort of excess costs that districts might have?
We didn't specifically look at excess costs for this particular audit.
So that would be your scope probably for your financial audit of SDE?
Or future rounds of this audit as well. I know in past, they looked specifically, part of their analysis was to look at the contractual piece and whether everyone who got cost reimbursement actually met the contractual language requirements. We didn't do that in this particular round of the audit because we were adding other objectives. And so we just had to sort of decide where to cut a few procedures as well.
Got it. Thank you very much. And thank you for all your work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. I just have one more question on finding number 8, non-compliance with employment history verification. This sort of the suggestion there and the critique is that there aren't internal controls. What kind of internal controls can the schools place? I think one has an entire compliance department. The other one has a third-party vendor. So what are what are sort of the options for internal controls that would help for both the criminal background check and for the employment verification?
I imagine they could take a variety of looks. Certainly one of the, like you mentioned, one of the providers shared with us that subsequent to the school year that we looked at, they had implemented a compliance department that was looking at contractual compliance, looking at other compliance to ensure that. It could be, it depends on the size and resources of the organization. Those are operational and managerial decisions, and we try not to be too directive with that. But I could see, what would really, I think, be helpful is a device by which a staff member can't be officially hired without having these various pieces complete. And that could be part of an HR system, right? If you have an HR system, you can't actually issue that first paycheck until someone checks that all the proper background check documentation is done. If it's on an Excel sheet, it could be, someone reviewing that Excel sheet to ensure that all those pieces are in place. So some separation of duties between the people who are reviewing the background information, people who are responsible for cutting that individual a paycheck, some place where there'd be a stop in the process that couldn't be avoided unless someone, unless all the background checks had been sufficiently completed. I just imagine that would look very different depending on what type of system the individual provider is using. And I know that several of them were moving toward a more centralized HR system and onboarding system as we were auditing them. And I would assume a system like that probably has some capacity to provide some level of control in that type of situation.
Internally. And I don't know if you saw how many, have like third-party vendors. The one of them seemed to go to a third-party vendor. Is that the common practice, or is it that you can sort of have internal control mechanisms within a compliance department, or even an assigned individual that sort of has oversight for compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. You could have internal controls within your own organization that would just be, again, they could be as simple as two different staff members who have to approve different aspects of the process so that, I'm not going to pay you unless I have someone who checks off that this is done. And if I saw it wasn't checked, I'd be going back to you and saying, were these done? I don't see any record of them. So you could have internal controls to mitigate this type of risk, I think, in any size organization and any process they might use. It would be a little bit more challenging, I think, it would in terms of a third-party vendor, but that hopefully would be part of the contractual piece with the vendor, that some assurance that these processes would be truly completed by the time that whatever connection there is between that third-party vendor and payroll authorization, or that there'd be some sort of reassurance, contractual reassurance there that process was going to work as planned.
Great. Thank you so much. And let me see. I don't see any other questions. Thank you so much for your time today and all the information. Very much appreciated. And all the work that you've done. Okay, so next we have Connecticut State Department of Education. Thank you. And we have a couple of people coming. Laura, are you joining too, or just Cynthia? Okay, all right. You're welcome to jump. And Cynthia, right, if you can just introduce yourselves and thank you for joining us today.
We just get started? Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Cynthia Moyano, Deputy Commissioner of Educational Supports and Wellness with the State Department of Education. To my right, I have my colleague, Brian Klimkowitz, who's our Division Director of our Bureau of Special Education Services. And we also have staff members that are here as well, who do the day-to-day operations. Do I have an opportunity to read our opening statement?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. I'm just going to warn you, it's a little wordy, so let's try to work through it. Okay. Good afternoon, Senator Gatkar-Wilcox, Representative Dathan, Senator Sampson, Representative Carney, and members of the Government Oversight and Education Committee. I'm Deputy Commissioner Sonia Moyano from the State Department of Education, and I'm happy to appear before you today. At the outset, the Connecticut State Department of Education extends its sincere appreciation to the auditors of public accountants for their thorough and collaborative work in conducting the performance audit of private providers of special education for the 22-23 school year. The department values the professional partnership demonstrated throughout this process and recognizes the audit of certain operations of private providers of special education that entered agreements with local education agencies as an important mechanism for strengthening oversight, transparency, and outcomes for all of our students with disabilities. while the responsibility for service delivery and individualized education program, also known as IEP, which I will reference today, implementation is shared by our local school districts and programs. The department's comprehensive approval and monitoring procedures are designed to ensure high-quality programming, continuous accountability, and processes to address identified issues. School districts place students in a variety of settings, APSEPs, RESTs, private settings, and out-of-state facilities based on the individual needs of the student. Local school districts' planning and placement teams, most of the time referred as PPTs, are required by the department and federal law to monitor student progress at each outplacement regardless of the location. The department takes the audit findings seriously and has initiated concrete actions in some of these responses we'll share today. As noted in the audit report response, the department's special education general monitoring and supervision team has reviewed the findings and implemented appropriate next steps. Where non-compliance was identified, the department has engaged directly with the identified programs to ensure timely corrective action, documentation of remediation, and where appropriate, follow-up monitoring activities. It is important to provide context for the legislature regarding the timing and scope of this audit, which was previously mentioned. The findings are based on data and practices from the 22-23 school year. The department's approval and reapproval decisions for the programs audited occurred prior to the audit and in accordance with the statutory and regulatory requirements in place at that time. APSEPs are approved on a 2 to 5 year regulatory requirement in place at that time cycle, during which programs are subject to comprehensive on-site reviews. And while this cycle provides a structured and rigorous oversight process, the department recognizes that compliance issues may arise between approval periods despite corrective actions that have already been undertaken by the department. To mitigate the risks, the department requires all approved private programs to complete an annual statement of assurance attestation signed by the program's executive leadership, affirming continued adherence to applicable standards, laws, and regulations. While this attestation process serves as an important accountability measure, the department has also developed an off-cycle review risk assessment process, which identifies a variety of factors that assist the department in determining whether additional review activities, including but not limited to off-cycle reviews, are warranted to strengthen ongoing compliance and quality assurance. Consistent with the department's commitment to continuous improvement, we have incorporated enhancements to the approval and monitoring practices, including expanded use of random sampling of personnel and student records, strengthened documentation requirements, and increased verification of corrective actions. The department has also aligned its work with newly enacted legislation, including requirements for model contracts and future unannounced site visits to ensure that oversight mechanisms continue to evolve in response to legislative actions and emerging best practices. The department will continue to work collaboratively with the auditors of public accounts, the General Assembly, local education agencies, and private providers to ensure that students with disabilities are educated in a safe, compliant, and high-quality setting. The audit further informs the department's ongoing efforts to strengthen systems, clarify expectations, and reinforce shared responsibility for improving the outcomes for our students with disabilities across the state. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify and for your continued partnership in this important work. Upon the conclusion of our testimony, we look forward to you hearing directly from the private providers regarding corrective actions they have implemented.
Thank you so much. Brian, is that a shared statement? You don't have anything?
Yes.
Okay, great.
that's
Thank you.
it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you again for being here and taking the time to answer some questions. I just have a couple of questions. I'll open it up for others. So just based on the statement and our conversation, with the strengthened documentation, is that required? What is the oversight process before the funding is actually allocated to the schools? I mean, do you require some verification of the services having been provided, or have you overseen the contract between the school and the private provider before that funding is out? What is the process for oversight there on the local contracts
So in regard.
before the funding goes out?
Before the funding goes out, in order for for funding to be dispersed, we do ask for the actual contractual agreement between the LEA, the local education agency, and the provider to see that they have an actual contract and services have been rendered.
Okay, yep.
Sure. Yeah. So through our excess cost reimbursement, which many of you may be familiar with, if a school is not approved by the State Department, then local districts are not able to access excess cost reimbursement. If the programs are approved through the checks and balances, as the Deputy Commissioner mentioned, the districts have to demonstrate that they have a contract in place prior to receiving the excess costs approval.
And when you're looking, I mean, when we started talking about the contract earlier, have you looked at contracts where you thought the language was too ambiguous? I mean, on what basis is a contract sufficient to then be able to warrant the funding? And on what basis have there been, have you identified sort of issues in that contract that perhaps can be remedied through a model contract? And have there been instances where then the funding wasn't allocated until the contract was redrafted?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. So the contract has to be in place. So we have two separate processes. Our department oversees the approval process. So we are looking to ensure that contracts exist. We're not reviewing necessarily the content of the contracts. However, through our experiences and what we've seen and what's already in legislation, we have, and we're engaging in a collaborative process around that. We have information about what should be in the model contracts.
Okay.
But essentially, and the auditors mentioned this, we want to see that the IEP is addressed for the student. So each individualized student's needs are addressed. The complication, as was mentioned, is that especially students that have high intensive needs, the frequency of their IEP, PPT meetings they're not only meeting once a year, they're meeting multiple times a year, and each meeting the services could change. They could increase, they could decrease. And so to have to go back to a contract to amend the contract each time the IEP provision is in place poses problems logistically for the programs. Mm-hmm. So we have ways in which we're guiding districts through that to say the IEP is the service. The APSEP has to implement that IEP, which the district oversees. And so the other piece is around costs. It has to be clear of the cost structure. As was mentioned previously, some of our approved private special education programs are tuition-based, whereas others are based on services delivered. So there's flexibility in how that cost structure is in place.
Right. And is there some and presumably the district is paying what they think is reasonable, but the district wouldn't know, for example, if the same private provider is charging another district for the exact same service a different price. So is there any oversight on that? I mean, they presumably are paying what they think is reasonable for their district, but is the State Department looking at the contracts overall? And I understand that there is a number of variables, but in the case of, related services, how would the district know that they're being charged what other districts are being charged? And how do we know as that the provider, we could presume they are, but we don't know. How would we know that they're in fact charging similar rates? So Fairfield and Bridgeport, for example, don't get two rates for similar services, even though they individually negotiated those contracts and both districts think those are reasonable. How do we know if they're comparable? And is anyone overseeing that from the State Department, or do you have a plan to do that?
So the legislature has taken steps to address this in recent legislation that's passed. One way we're doing that this year is that any charging entity that increases their costs this year has to submit that request to the district. So our private programs are no longer allowed to increase costs mid-year.
Right.
They have to appeal to the State Department of Education. We have a 60-day timeline to be able to review that information, turn that back around. We have yet to receive a request for that this year. And also for the State Department to collect information from our programs. The approved private special education programs are also, by the end of the calendar year in December, required to communicate to the districts their rates for the next school year, for the following school year. So that's a new requirement that is in place that's being instituted. And finally, the State Department is being asked to collect that data and post it transparently, so to address some of the issues that you just mentioned.
Great, good. So going forward, we'll have this mechanism for comparison,
Yeah,
which is great.
yeah,
Senator,
Thank-
can I just add
Oh,
to
yes.
that? In listening to the auditors and their depth of years of service, mine has been in the field over 20 years as a teacher. And so I can tell you from my experience, although I'm representing the State Department of Education, what happens at the district level is you're always forecasting costs, especially with special education services. And so there are superintendents, even though you have an accounts payable department that's overseeing the billing piece of it, you are monitoring that on a month-to-month basis, or when you get your reports from your APSAPs to monitor to see fluctuation, or have services been rendered, what are they charging? You do pick up the phone at times and you do call APSAPs and ask those questions. So there are districts that do that, at least the ones that I've been part of, where you do take those extra steps because you need a better understanding of where the cost is coming from, especially if the costs are going up. So I just wanted to share that from my experience.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And just one more question on the unannounced site visits. How often how do you determine when to make those visits, and how often do those happen for schools? Do you do a risk-based assessment as well for which schools will get an unannounced visit, and does it increase based on prior violations? How do you make that assessment?
so the legislation as written talks about random unannounced.
Right.
So in the context of random, we don't factor in.
Okay.
We have a cohort-based model now where the districts are distributed across 3 equal cohorts, roughly 55 to 60 districts in each cohort. The requirement for unannounced on-site visits for approved private special education programs begin July 1, 2026. However, we've proactively incorporated approved private special education programs in our random audits. On any given year, for our random audits of our LEAs, and whether they're the RESCs and or APSEPs that we folded in, are between 12 and 14 districts in a year.
And
Or-
entirely randomized because there's no risk assessment, or you don't look at.
We
prior
do
violations.
have a risk assessment, so we have a risk. I'm not speaking to the APSEP approval specifically, although we do. The deputy commissioner mentioned our risk factors there. So we have mechanisms to receive information from, as the auditor has mentioned, media reports, advocacy agency reports, concerns from parents. We have call centers, not only at the Bureau of Special Education, but also the Connecticut Parent Advocacy Center. So as concerns come in, we can, even if a district or a program is not in the cycle, we can incorporate them and factor those pieces in. For example, there was a High Roads report a few years back, and the CSDE conducted an off-cycle review, even though it wasn't part of our cycle.
Okay.
So we
just
do factor that
different
in.
kind of review, not the
Exactly.
unannounced.
We have different processes in place depending on if we're being responsive to the legislature, our responsibility as general supervision as a whole.
Great. Thank you. That's very helpful.
You're welcome.
And let me open up to my co-chairs here first. Representative Dathan.
Thank you so much. And just wanted to clarify, the private providers here are only providing services under IEPs and not 504 plans. Is that correct?
So that is typical that only students with IEPs would be in a placement situation through the planning and placement team process. There are very rare circumstances where a student may be on a Section 504 plan or in the process of identification for special education eligibility, where a placement may occur. Typically, those are more 45-day placements to help inform the eligibility determination. but primarily these programs service students with IEPs.
Got it. In this audit report, they talk about approved versus non-approved. Can you please clarify why a provider might not be approved?
Yeah, so our state has several private programs that are not approved by the state. It's a voluntary application process to become approved by the state. If a program is not approved, planning and placement teams may not place students unless there's extenuating circumstances in those programs. And as mentioned earlier, LEAs are not able to access state funds through the excess cost reimbursement in those non-approved. So all of our standards in our oversight related to our approved private special education programs do not apply to the non-approved programs.
So looking again at materiality and thinking about the students that are in approved programs versus non-approved, do you have a breakdown of students receiving services in each of these types of programs? And you could estimate for everyone here what that might be.
We do, to the extent that the student is a public school student. There are circumstances, for example, if students attend a private school, whether it be religious-based or other, parents disenroll that student, choose to send the child there. I also mentioned, didn't mention here, sorry, I apologize, I'm thinking of the previous meeting, but there are settlement agreements that can be in place made outside of the planning and placement team process where the district and the parent come to an agreement to send a student there. And in those circumstances, the student may or may not still be a public school student in our system and in our oversight realm, if you will. And but a majority of our students are placed in in approved private special education programs when their outplacements happen.
Okay, and in terms of dollars allocated, I know some of this wouldn't fall under excess cost or some of
Right.
it would, so it's kind of hard to quantify. But I would just love to know, especially if as appropriations is kind of kicking off very soon, what kind of dollar amounts we're talking about going to approved providers and non-approved providers. And probably don't know those numbers offhand, but if you can maybe share with the committee clerks and administrators, that would be great. I think folks on these committees, especially ones who aren't appropriate, would like to understand that. Jumping into finding one, when we talked about failure to deliver services, the audit report is really addressing, these selected providers, but how does the agency outside of the audit process ensure that our providers are actually doing the contracted services? And how do you have oversight as a agency to do that?
So as you can as you can imagine, it's really a shared accountability in the case of individual students, where the individual students team, the family, the school district oversees the implementation of the IEP. The approved private special education students programs upon acceptance of students are attesting to the fact that they can implement the IEP. The districts are still responsible whether or not the approved private special education implements the IEP as needed. At the state level, there are a variety of ways that we oversee this process through students. When we go into programs, we're reviewing progress reports. We have state level data that we're looking at around, again, a previous presentation today around required data points that we're tracking and monitoring for each and every student with an IEP across the state. So at that state level, we're reviewing achievement on our state assessments, graduation rates, dropout rates, so longer term aspects. When we do our on-site visits for our LEAs, we have a process called service verification. It's a little different than what was described by the auditors and the amount of time that they spent on the service logs. There's no federal or state requirement for local education agencies to document or log their services. The approved private programs are required to log their services. Any districts that's accessing Medicaid reimbursement for related services are doing the logging. If a parent files a complaint with us and says that they're concerned that the child's IEP is not being implemented, we're looking at logs. So even though it's not required, as was mentioned previously, if there's no evidence or documentation of, then we can't assume that it's happened. But we're also looking at the progress of the student, meaning from the first quarter IEP goals and objectives, are they being met? Is the student not making progress? So there's different ways and mechanisms that as a state, we're overseeing that IEP implementation.
So a lot is on the shoulders of the school counselors who are trying to project manage the situation. Does that sound about right? As well as families to kind of have that sort of balancing check?
Our educators take very seriously the IEP implementation. So as you mentioned, the case managers are overseeing each student. The planning and placement teams are reporting progress on a regular basis, at typically quarterly or in alignment with report cards. And so that's very important for information. But we hear from parents that they haven't received progress reports as documented in the IEP. And so in those cases, the state reviews that information with our Connecticut Special Education Data System. We're able to real time understand if those progress reports were done and just not delivered to the parent. In some cases, that is the case, that the district has it and the parent just weren't able to access it for whatever reason. Other circumstances, we're able to determine, in fact, that the progress reports are not completed, and then the state would follow up as needed.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, and I'm sorry. If you have anywhere on your website about the trends and students receiving special ed services through state funds, maybe for the last, I don't know how often you track it, but maybe for the last I want to try to have some pre-COVID numbers as well as current sort of population and census on that, and also the number of caseworkers that we have in our state within our districts and our public schools that are outplacing these students for the private providers. I'd love to get kind of just an understanding what the correlation is, because it seems like, I hear in talking to local districts that the caseload has severely increased in the last 10 years. And that's because, the number of counselors maybe haven't increased, but the number of folks that are receiving services has. So that would be great. And then sorry, I forgot about my last question on background checks. What does the agency do to ensure that our private providers are maintaining background checks, not just the ones that are undergoing audits, and understanding folks that might have like a criminal record? How does that affect their employment?
Thank you. That is part of our process when we're doing our approvals. And so we do this as the deputy commissioner mentioned, we've actually enhanced our processes over the last several years with this. What we do is we require the APSEPs to submit to us their entire staff that are working directly with students in whatever type of format, spreadsheet, Excel document. We ask them to put the dates that the background checks, fingerprinting, and the previous employment, and the dates that those were done. And then we randomly select from that list to review and look in the files to confirm that information. And so one thing that's important to note is that if in a previous year, the background check wasn't done in a timely manner, that issue is going to come up in the next audit and the next audit, because those records cannot be, that's stated. So moving forward, we're looking for those pieces to be in place. And we're also requiring the approved private special education. The previous auditors talked a little bit about systems and HR systems. Depending on the size of the approved private special education program, we're really looking at policies. When you're hiring someone and onboarding folks, we want to see a checklist with these requirements included that someone is attesting to and signing off that was complete and done. When we find as part of our process, which we do, where there are non-compliance related to those checks, we ask that they be addressed as soon as possible. And then we ask for any new employee that's hired within the year thereafter, the programs are submitting that information to us real time so that we could see the systems improving. But those non-compliance issues in previous audits are there as long as the employee is with the program.
I would add to that, that the other piece that's very important in this process is the training of the staff, depending on the size of the staff at the facility, that if we do find an audit finding and give recommendation, part of that recommendation is also training to improve and tighten up their systems, especially if they don't have a third-party vendor administering it. It's just simple checks and balances amongst those who are there, and the importance of knowing why they're collecting the data that they're collecting or the information and how long it needs to stay inside the personnel files. Because there's specific laws that state how long things stay in a personnel file.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you for addressing the training. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Dathan. Senator McCrory.
Yes, just a quick follow-up in regards to site visits. How many approved private special education programs do we have throughout the state?
86.
How many?
86.
86. How many personnel do you have within the Bureau of Special Education that actually have the ability to go out and do site visits?
1.25 FTE.
1.25.
Yes.
Okay.
Our
That's
capacity
good
is,
to know.
we also have additional folks on sites with us. So the CSD, so as part of our on-site, our team leads that process, but we also have a director from an LEA attend with us, as well as a director from an APSEP who's not being audited.
Okay. Okay.
And then when information comes back, our teams do some cross-divisional collection, not just of information, but of data sharing as well to improve our own best practice or to even gather more information of what, for example, especially let's say with background checks, it would be talking with our talent office and doing cross-divisional work in regards to supporting that work as well.
Okay. Thank you for that. And my last question would be in regards to the non-approved entities we have. If I heard you correct, who pays for the services for those individual students who are going to the non-approved? I'm assuming excess costs cannot be used for that. Is the cost placed on the parents?
So the parents may pay for those non-approved. A district may as well use local funds in those contexts as well. And so it could be a combination. There's different scenarios and different non-approved programs. But if, as I mentioned earlier, if a parent may choose to unenroll from the public school setting and choose to go to private school, that in that case, the parent, even if a student was previously identified with an IEP, the parent accepts that cost and that responsibility. If there's a settlement agreement between the parent and the school district related to special education in some way, but outside of the process, it could be a cost sharing agreement between the local district and the parent.
Do you have any, and lastly, do you have any idea how many non-approved programs we have in the state?
I can get that data for you. I just don't have it off the top of my head.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Senator McCrory. Oh, Representative Khan.
Thank you. Just in terms of prior recommendations of audits, are there any changes that the department has had based on any of those prior recommendations, or how you have successfully solved one of the specific issues that was raised prior?
I'll start maybe too. Yeah, so looking at the audit, we took it very seriously. We also did some on-site visit with some specifics. So for example, we took all of them seriously, but if you look at the drills and the safety piece, we went and it was something as simple as the so for example, let me go back. Finding 14, the non-compliance with teacher administration evaluation requirement. That was internally working with our talent officer. When this audit was done, the educator and leader evaluation guidelines were being adopted. Were actually adopted by the State Board of Education in June of 2023. And there were some flexibilities that were afforded to LEAs as well as APSEPs in the evaluation process. But as of 2024-25 school year, they were to implement the new state guidelines. Programs now must complete an annual statement of assurance by October 15, which our talent office collects, and we document what their performance evaluation plan is. It needs to get approved by the State Department of Education. And then we require that now as part of the approval process, because it didn't exist before. And then as previously stated, the Bureau of Special Education and Talent Office collaborate to ensure that APSEPs have an approved performance plan on file with the CSD. So we're constantly cross-referencing when our staff go out and audit and bring back perhaps recommendations or findings. It's checks and balances internally, making sure that we are speaking and also have systems in place to be able to communicate that information on time. The other piece was there was insufficient, the piece on reliance of excessive non-certified staff. Wanted to speak a little bit about that because the audit referenced the DSAP process, and what that is a permit, and many of you know or may not know, there are different pathways into our career and our profession, and the DSAP is one of them. What that affords is that in shortage areas, people who have a bachelor's also have 12 credit hours in the specific area they're going to teach, are permitted to receive this permit while they're receiving their certification. It's for a year, sometimes it can be extended for 2, but we use it as a recruitment pipeline in the state as well. And as people are working towards certification, we have a national shortage. And so that is something too that we're also monitoring. Not just our APSEPs, but also our LEAs. They have to be approved by the State Department of Education. And then we're working, right? Because when you have a DSAP, you also have to have systems in place at the APSEPs to also provide ongoing supervision, supports for the growth of the individual, as well as providing continuous feedback. So it's a systemic approach, but also it's a way in how people can get certified who may not have specific credentials. We also to receive the certification. Sometimes we have people that come from out of state and are certified in another state, and we may have specific requirements that gives people time to meet whatever specific requirements are. So that is something that we're also continuously monitoring, and we literally meet and discuss that, and also see where we need to put certain supports in place to support not just the APSEPs, because this is also used by our local LEAs, but it's also a way in how we grow our own workforce as well. So, but we are continuously monitoring that. There was another finding on specific things on safety where there was like a latch of a door that wasn't closing appropriately. We actually went out right after the audit, did a site visit and monitored that and other things in just to be able to give that immediate feedback and make sure that it was working and that they have an actual system of checking that on a regular basis. Every system has a way in how they do it. It's either monthly or quarterly or whatever the case may be, but we take this very seriously. So we wanted to make sure that the recommendations given are not just recommendations, but that they're followed through as well. And I think the biggest piece was also our enhanced monitoring with the risk assessment, now really looking at that closely. And you can speak a little bit more to that if you'd like.
Okay, to the DSAP comment, I think my concern here was the over-reliance, that were all those teachers going to be able to have mentoring, as you mentioned, because that is a requirement for DSAP. So if there are mostly DSAP teachers, then who is coaching them, and mentoring them, which is a requirement that the district still has to do. But overall, I think, the other thing I wanted to ask, because these are programs that are approved by us in the state, is their approval status at all affected if and when there are recommendations that are made that are not followed? Like, would that be at jeopardy? I'm just wondering if that is part of the process, or other than just, we can recommend this, and then if they don't do it, then what happens?
Thank you for that question. Yes, so as part of our process, we issue a preliminary report to the approved private special education program with our findings. The program reviews that report and then needs to acknowledge and agree that they will address those issues. And depending on the standard that was identified, there's different processes that we use to follow up. And so their approval is contingent upon completion of those corrective actions. So if the time frame is, if there isn't timely addressing of those issues, that could impact a program status. We are able to issue a conditional approval until the corrective actions are met. In some cases, that is the process. But in our experience, and as was mentioned by the auditors, our approved private special education programs are very responsive and work with our team to address those issues in a timely manner. But there are circumstances where their approval status has been affected. And it could also affect the length in the time where a program is approved. The range from 2 years to 5 years is a wide range. If we go in and do an approval and there are no identified standard deficiencies, they may have the maximum amount of the, if there are issues related to background checks or other areas that we have seen, and that once they're rectified, we may do a 2-year approval and check in at a more frequent basis. So that's how the approval status could be affected by findings.
Okay. I think my main concern really is just, and I'm saying this for, all, including chairs, is that, if there's nothing in place necessarily, and I understand that there are follow-ups from the APSEPs that often are corrective, but they're only coming after an audit is happening or somebody has come in, right? A lot of the findings that are referenced here are current law, and it's not that I don't know if they weren't out aware of current law, but I think if you're in the business of providing special education for students, then you should have these, you should have knowledge of what the law states and what it does not state. So the fact that the recommendations are being followed after the fact, I'm glad, but I think that we'd like to see more proactive approaches to make sure that it's not, it's not going under the radar if the audit was not happening, especially given that we have audits every 7 years. So that means for 7 years, there's necessarily might not be any checks and balances in place. And if programs know that, then what is requiring me to really follow the law for the next 7 years until the next audit is in place? And that's my concern right there, is that I think that I would like to see maybe more proactive measures. And if that comes as recommendations from you guys for us to do legislatively, by all means, but I think that we need to look at some of that. Thank you.
No, that's point taken. And I think some of the proactivity doesn't need to be legislated. I think we can go back and really think a little bit more about what are some of the technical assistance we can put in place to be proactive beyond what we've done, right? There's always ways in how we can continue improving our practice. And so point taken, if there are things that need to be legislated, then that's, so I just think sometimes there could be other measures taken before.
I agree.
Some
I agree.
things
I just mean if you
legislative,
feel there is something
Yeah.
that we can do legislatively, by all means, but I would allow the department to figure out what that needs to be. I would love to hear it, just so I'm aware as well, because I think that that's the biggest, just to make sure we have checks and balances in place.
Representative Khan, just one more comment on that, in that the auditor's timeframe was mentioned as 7 years and ours is more frequent than that. And then I think it's important to state that like those annual attestations and ways that we collect information in between are critical, not only for compliance, but also the quality in the services that the students are receiving. And so as the Deputy Commissioner mentioned, point well taken. We take all the recommendations seriously and look to continuously improve the process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from committee members? No, okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so we're gonna hear from some of our private providers, starting with the American School for the Deaf. Jeff?
Good afternoon, co-chairs and members of both the Government Oversight Committee and the Education Committee. Very nice to see you all this afternoon. I want to thank you for the opportunity today to provide testimony regarding the recent performance audit conducted by the State of Connecticut Auditors of Public Accounts for the 2022 to 2023 school year. My name is Jeffrey Braven. I'm Executive Director and Superintendent of the American School for the Deaf. Here with me today is Paula Morabito, our Assistant Executive Director and Assistant Superintendent of ASD. Before I talk more about the audit, I think it's important that I talk about ASD's work with the state of Connecticut. We value our partnership with the state of Connecticut, and we have for over 200 years, in our strong relationship with the State Department of Education, and along with the Department of Children and Families. Currently, we have about 170 students on our campus. 115 of those 170 students are state of Connecticut residents, and the rest are from out of state or from other countries. 50 of our students in our PACES residential treatment program that is licensed by the Connecticut Department of Children and Families. More than 22 students are part of our autism program, and that includes not just deaf students on the autism spectrum, but also hearing students who are on the autism spectrum but are nonverbal. That means they have no ways to express themselves verbally, so they use sign language as a means to express themselves, and that program is growing. We also serve more than 120 families in the state of Connecticut in our Birth to 3 program to ensure that they get appropriate access to language and communication. We also serve over 80 students in our outreach programs throughout the entire state to ensure that deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind students are getting appropriate access to education, even within public schools. We also have an amazing online academy program where we provide education to more than 80 students across the globe so they have appropriate access to education. So in total, we serve more than 500 students and families through all of our programs. We also have more than 385 staff working for our programs. I see that some of you have already come to visit our campus, and I see that there are those of you that have yet to visit. So I just want to extend that invitation and that welcome to come visit our school so you can see the amazing work we do, especially the work that our staff are doing at our school. At the American School for the Deaf, we are so appreciative of the work that the auditors of public accounts have done. As the first permanent school for the deaf in the United States, it is important that we look at our integrity and our transparency to ensure that our services meet the state's expectations. While organizations such as ourselves and many other organizations who are here today always strive for a clean audit, and we have had clean financial audits for the past several years, which we're extremely proud of, but yes, audits are there for a purpose. I firmly believe that the purpose of an audit is to ensure that we have appropriate oversight to make sure we're identifying areas of continuous improvement. Within our policies and procedures, our auditors are Whittlesey, and they're a very well-known firm here in the state of Connecticut, and they've done many audits for us, financial audits, IT audits, HR audits, program audits. We also have another amazing law firm called Shipman and Goodwin. They closely review our policies and procedures here in the state of Connecticut, and we're very proud of our collaboration with both of those groups for over 30 years to ensure that we're providing the right kind of services and meeting the needs of our students with our policies and procedures. We want to ensure that our students are safe and getting the right kind of access to education at our school. The audit did identify several areas which ASD internal procedures needed to be strengthened. We accept those findings and we take them very seriously. We've already implemented corrective actions. Some are happening actually as the audit was taking place. We want to continue to improve. The key for us is not repeating the same mistake over and over. If we continue to make changes, we know we will do things right. The same is true when the State Department of Education, the Department of Children and Families, whenever they come to our campus, sometimes on a monthly basis, sometimes quarterly, annually, biannually, we take all of their recommendations and we adjust accordingly to make sure that we remain viable and are providing appropriate services to our students. In conclusion, we view the audit process as a constructive partnership with the state of Connecticut, and we have used those findings to revise our internal policies and remain assured that ASD continues to be the leader in providing high-quality compliance and transparency special education services, particularly to the specific population that we serve, which is deaf, hard of hearing, deaf-blind, student with other disabilities, and students on the autism spectrum as well. And that requires direct, accessible communication. So we find that these findings are serious, and you can rest assured that we've taken appropriate steps to correct all of those findings. We also remain committed to our manifesto, where communication opens the world, and where our children continue to strive to become always able. I want to thank this committee for their oversight and the opportunity to talk about our commitment to continuous improvement. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all that you're doing to serve the needs of the students that you have on campus. Can you maybe walk us through some of those specific corrective measures that you are taking to be proactive to make sure there aren't repeated violations?
Sure. So Paula is the expert and she has been working through the audit. However, that being said, I'm going to start. And I just want to share a couple of things. Related to receiving service documentations to ensure that all of our students are receiving appropriate services. At the time when the audit was being conducted, the documentation was kept at the district level, not by the American School for the Deaf. Since then, we've made a revision where we now are maintaining documentation of all of those services that we provide at our school. Paula, feel free to add in if I've missed anything. For human resources and student safety, we are committed to providing a safe environment for our students. We always do criminal background checks for our new hires, and we agree with the auditor's findings that we needed to improve our process. Since then, we've developed a formal policy to address state and national criminal background checks for all of our staff. Prior to 2019, we also made revisions to our processes internal in our HR department to ensure that we are meeting all 3 professional reference checks requirements. And that is something that is absolutely required, and we are doing that. And so that's something that's already in our policies and procedures. Third, related to requirements of following with health and safety standards and medication administration, we have adjusted our policy to ensure that all 12 months checks must be done. We know that sometimes it can be hard to chase parents down and get signatures on those medication forms, but we do everything we can to make that happen. We have also addressed the facilities related to seclusion rooms. That was something that was already corrected by the time that the auditors were at our site. Last, talking about contracts. Yes, we are working very closely with the State Department of Education, and we continue to have a discussion. And once they're ready to develop the right kind of model contract, we will be more than happy to follow suit and utilize that. But now, as they did testify earlier, both the auditors and the state, that every school district has different expectations. Every private school probably has different expectations. And so the contract process is a complex one. And if we can simplify that, I think everybody will be much happier. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And being prepared and also being proactive in putting into place those corrective measures. Very much appreciate that. Are there other questions from committee members? Representative Leeper.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Just hi. It's always so wonderful to see you guys. You do incredible work. And I'll speak for myself, but I think I speak for many of us. We're so proud to have you and your program in our state. Was your residential component also a part of this audit? And do you feel like that played into some of the findings? Are those unique findings? Are there ways we could better support the needs that this addresses for the residential component of your program versus your day component of your program?
Thank you so much for that question. I'll allow Paula to elaborate, but I do want to start by saying this audit is focusing on the school. The residential treatment program is actually licensed by the Department of Children and Families. And the Department of Children and Families has an extremely intensive inspection that they do every single year. And I think that's pretty sufficient unless the state feels that we need to do more. But I want to turn it over to Paula.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that will also be directly related to when we talk about contracts. Each state has their own contracting requirement. Even if we could come to some kind of a template just within the state schools, I think that would be beneficial. But I think once we try to, try to impose our contract onto other states, that may be difficult because they have their own state requirements.
Thank you.
And just one more to add on to that. As you know, we have our residential treatment program. And in years past, when I first started 12 years ago, we had 6 states that we had contracts with. We have now grown to 16. So that number continues to increase, which is very nice for the school. However, that being said, it also is extremely complex because every state has specific trainings that are required, specific performances that have to be done. And so we work very closely alongside those states to meet not just our own state requirements, but theirs as well. And in some ways, it's wonderful because our staff are well trained because they're doing trainings for Connecticut and other additional states. And so sometimes they're doing much more than what is required by the state of Connecticut.
I'll just say it. I really appreciate you sharing that insight. Thank you.
Oh, Representative Dathan.
Thank you so much. And it's nice seeing you again. I enjoy your testimony always in appropriations, and I love the advocacy that we get from your community. So I think you kind of covered some of the delivery of services and how you're internally tracking those, and that's really appreciated. And I think, our population wants to know, that their tax dollars are going to deliver the great services and have good outcomes. One of the concerns I had was regarding the compliance with backyard background checks and some of the training, and just was hoping that you could address that, and also the situation with the person that came up with the criminal record. Not to talk about anybody individually, but just to understand how we can face that going forward. And if you can clarify if these were admin facing roles or student facing roles. Thank you very much.
So as we mentioned, as Jeff mentioned in his opening remarks, a lot of the procedures and, policies that we had in place, we were putting new procedures in place. Again, it's a constant, review of a continuous improvement process for our entire campus. One of those was the new hire checklist for any new staff that came on board, regardless whether custodial, direct service, administrative, AA. Everybody has a checklist that must be complied, including fingerprinting, backgrounds, employment verification from other states, and there is now an HR policy that goes in, and the HR professional has to sign off if that has been received before anybody is put into the role. And that actually was dated June of 23, right around the same time. So we knew that this was happening. We recognized that. We put that into place when we also recognized that we were shifting some of our HR team. So we have a brand new team in our HR department around that same time, and they came with some fresh eyes and they helped us develop that new procedure. And so that has been followed. As far as the staff person that did come back, I think that did get missed, and that was around that same time before the official checklist came in. And I think it was just a matter of, it was an out-of-state check and it didn't come in on time. So again, that was one of the ones that would have been caught with our new procedure before they even walked into a classroom.
Great. Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
know parents want to make sure that their kids are in a safe place.
Yes.
Thank you very
absolutely.
much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, and thank you so much. I also would like to add that I think it's important for the legislature to understand this, that when we make a request for a background check, we submit that to the Connecticut Department of Children and Families, and that background check is only for Connecticut if a person has a Connecticut background check. We also have the federal criminal background check, but if you're talking about a background check from a specific state, let's say, for instance, if a person moves here from Michigan, we then have to do a background check from Michigan, and that process could take months. And so we will accept employees working in our facility until we get that back. If that comes back and we find something, we will call the person and ask them to leave depending on the severity of what has been found. But Connecticut does not have a national background check that you can check that will work with every state. Other states do have that process. And so I'm hopeful that at some point Connecticut will be able to implement that system one day down the road.
Is that true for those who are employed in student-facing capacities and administrative? Before the background check comes in, you can are individuals still able to work with students, in other words? From another state?
Yes.
So,
Yes, according to DCF regulations, yes, you can do that.
thank you. And thank you for all the corrective measures you're taking, for being so proactive about it and responding to the audit, and for being here today and providing all this information, and for everything that you're doing. And I would like to come visit your campus. I haven't been there, so I've just been told, make sure I come by. So yes, thank you very much.
You definitely will you'll be getting an email from me.
Thank you. So next we have the Bridgeport Public Schools. I know we actually, as part of the Bridgeport delegation, we have a delegation meeting with the school. So I'm not sure. I don't see either Dr. Avery or Michelle on. Are they on Zoom? No. Okay. So we'll come back. So we'll go to Gary Hunt.
Yeah, hi everyone.
Oh, you're here. Great.
Yep. Yeah, so I want to start by saying I apologize for not being in person for the meeting. I had obligations at a school today that I didn't want to cancel, especially after the snow days. They were expecting me. So I do really appreciate that virtual was provided as an option for me today so I can still participate. Thank you. So first, thank you, chairs and members of the committee. My name is Gary Hunt. I'm the Regional Vice President overseeing the Higher School of Wallingford. I've actually spent the last 22 years in education. I began my career as a paraprofessional, and then I served as a special education teacher, and I was a school principal for many years as well. The Higher School of Wallingford is an approved private special education program under the Connecticut State Department of Education, and we currently serve 50 students with IEPs whose needs require a high level of support. In many cases, we're working with students whose options are narrowing and helping districts and families maintain an appropriate, less restrictive environment. I do also, as other people have said, take time here to thank the auditors of public accounts. It was a very professional process and we appreciated it. The goal today here is for me to respond directly and provide context to the report where it can be helpful. Most importantly, though, I do want everyone to hear that we've treated this audit as an opportunity to strengthen our practices and support students. And most of that directly involves documentation measures. We accepted all the recommendations, put corrections in place as soon as possible. But I also want to reassure everyone that a priority for us has been to ensure that we have internal processes in place as well that reinforce continuous improvement, such as our whole school health audit that we just completed in the fall of this school year. So yeah, thank you again for the invitation and thank you for your time today.
Hey, thank you so much for being here and joining by Zoom. We know that other things come up at the same time. Can you walk us through the corrective measures that you've taken in response to the audit?
Of course, yeah. So the first one is under related services. The context here is that we do service a complex population of students. And so we do have attendance issues with some of our students, engagement issues. This was talked about before in relation to COVID. And unfortunately, it's common that we experience that. That said, the corrective measure that we took is that we really needed to improve our documentation. We weren't tracking everything that was being delivered because we were relying on related service providers to track and document minutes alone. And that's just wasn't fair on them. So we moved to a centralized system. So we have a system called Student Central now that allows them to enter all that data and then also give us visibility into that as well. So we know where we're at with that. I guess background checks. So specifically employer verification forms. So I'll agree with what Brian spoke about here. The ones that we had issue with here were long-serving staff with which we couldn't produce those documents because when those staff were hired, we didn't maintain the records. That said, we agree with the finding and implemented an improved system. We have a dedicated onboarding team now. And again, I think the auditor said this before. My goal and the way that it works now is that school staff don't get to see a new staff member until all of the items that need to be completed are completed. So the staff member can't walk into the building until we have all of those things completed. And before, again, it was placed on us school staff and through the HR department, and we needed a separate department to take care of all that. And that's what we're doing today. There was a finding with medication, and that was around physicians writing, for instance, end of school year instead of a specific date on medications. And then, in turn, our nurse at the school was accepting that as a valid date. So we have retrained our nurse and med techs to no longer accept that from physicians. It can't say start of school year or end of school year. It needs to say specifically, September 1 to June 15th. And that's all we'll accept at this point. And if we don't have that, then it's not delivered. Emergency drills. So with the emergency drills, we took the recommendation, obviously. We did complete all the drills, but we failed to note in comments whether it was done satisfactory or not. We left it blank there because I think the school staff believed that if it was done well, where they didn't have any feedback, they didn't need to fill that portion out. We know now that moving forward, we need to complete that no matter what, and just put feedback in there, put performance in there, just make some notes in there about the emergency drills that are conducted. DSAP and SEED. So again, I think Brian touched on this when he was speaking. The context here is that in the school year that's being discussed, we understood the SEED process to be optional for DSAPs. So when we submitted our state plan, we didn't include it for DSAPs. and therefore we focus on our internal processes to best prepare our staff for the classroom instead. So DSAPs need lots of help, right? They need direct coaching, they need professional development that's tailored for them. They get assigned a mentor in the school as well. And they need what all teachers get, right? Informal and formal observation with structured feedback. But that said, the school year after this, we move forward with agreeing that it is best practice to include them both in the seed process and also in our internal practices as well.
Great. And I just want to follow up on finding one,
Yep.
which was particularly problematic only because there were the percentage of services delivered, I mean, combined was 52%, which is self-problematic, but some were like 30% or 40%. And so what I heard you say was that perhaps more services were being delivered, but they weren't being accounted for. So are those numbers inaccurate?
I just know that we had a documentation need that we needed to fix, right? Because we weren't tracking everything that we should have been tracking. I have 4 social workers, for instance, at this building. And so I think that the problem is that we were relying on related service providers to track their minutes and document their notes. And we needed to move that to a centralized system so that we can help them track it and we can also get visibility into it as well. Yeah.
I mean, because in some of these cases, districts were paying double for half the services. And so were they ever told at any point? I presume some of it wasn't provided. So were the districts ever informed that these services weren't being provided, though they were being billed for the related service?
Yeah, so 2 things there. We didn't bill for related services that weren't provided. We only billed for services that were provided. That's how we do our billing. Is it doesn't get billed to the district until we actually provide that service. My school leaders are in communication with both the parents and the districts to let them know student progress. And there's other reporting in place as well, such as monthly attendance to districts and quarterly IEP tracking as well. But then, at PPTs, that's really the place where we have this, large discussion about what's going on with the students. Related services are at that meeting and they provide input. And that's typically where decisions are made about services being amended or anything along those lines.
So districts weren't billed, but they were they were aware, I guess, then that the services weren't being delivered in violation of the IEP in those cases. Going forward, is there a plan to make sure that those services, what's going to be different going forward? Except for the documentation, but in terms of being able to ensure that these services are actually being provided to meet the needs of the student.
Yeah, so it is part of the answer is that we just need to track and document our related services much better because that does in turn help us know what needs to be delivered to students and make sure that what we believe we've delivered, we've actually delivered. The other part of this too is that a lot of those decisions are going to be made, like I said, at a PPT meeting. So when we update the district on how it's going and where we're at, we can then have those discussions with districts about, again, with related service provider input, what services need to be amended or provided, that kind of thing.
Great, thank you. And I'm gonna see if my co-chairs. Senator McCrory?
Yeah, I just have one question in regards to your DSAPs. What percentage of your staff are actually certified? And we know it's very difficult to find special ed educators in the state of Connecticut. It actually is a countrywide issue, but what percent of your staff is certified and what percent are actually DSAP?
Currently, this school year or during the audited period?
Well, yeah, so you can give me the audit period.
Currently, I'll do currently. So currently we have 50% of our staff that are fully certified. So a combination of professional and initial full certification. And then we have 3 teachers that are DSAP teachers 2 of them are actually just missing one criteria in order to get their full certification. if you don't mind, I just want to talk about DSAPs really quick. DSAPs are something that CSDE allows us to do, and it's a really helpful way to get teachers into the profession of special education, where we really need teachers. It's a way for us to get a teacher in and hopefully get them a love for working with special education students and a love for the profession. We pay for them to go back to school and to get all of the requirements completed. So they're going to school while they help out in the building with our students. And then hopefully they stick around and they stay in special education. And it's a way that we can impact the staffing shortage. It is a really good thing that the CSDE is offering to be able to just address that staffing issue.
Right, and I'm well aware of DSAPs. I think is
okay.
And my question also, so people who are not familiar with DSAP, these individuals have a college degree, a 4-year degree, and it's not necessarily in the field of education, but they do have a 4-year degree and what you're doing is trying to get them to become in the case if they do have an education undergraduate degree, they can go into the DSAP program, but if they don't, they still can they still work with just a traditional college degree?
Yeah, they have a college degree. They also have 12 credits in special education. So they're basically on their way to certification, and they get a position in the school. And then, like I said, I think a lot of programs, well, maybe not a lot of programs, but some programs will do what we do, is that we help them through college. So we pay for them to go to college to be able to finish out those credits, hoping that, this is something that they'll choose as a career.
Thank you.
Yep, you got it.
Thank you, Senator McCrory. Representative Khan.
Thank you. I'm actually going to follow up on that question from Senator McCrory. So I think I heard you say that 50% right now of your staff are currently certified individuals. And I think that to me sounds a little bit concerning. While DSAP are helpful for the field in order to get teachers in the field faster and help us cover the positions that we have shortages for, a reliance on DSAP, a reliance on staff that are on DSAP, especially in working with students that are a more vulnerable population, that we are not able to address their needs in a traditional school environment, sounds concerning. DSAP are first-year teachers, and they are, if anything, a little bit less qualified than first-year teachers because they didn't complete what is their student teaching requirement. I myself did DSAP for special education, and you are teaching just as you are normally would be teaching. However, you don't have the student teaching component that you would have had. So you are a first-year teacher at best, and I think an over-reliance on them in any program, even if it was a traditional school program, would be problematic, possibly. But specifically in a program that is to serve higher needs students, I have a concern there. So is there any plans that you guys have to reduce the reliance on DSAP to fulfill these roles?
Yeah, so two things. I mean, we do put lots of extra support in place for those DSAP teachers. At this building, we have 2 092 administrators that support them, as well as 2 of our teachers there that help mentor also have 092s, as well as our special ed and our veteran teachers. But to your question, I mean, we are continuously sourcing for teachers. It's not okay to say that we're accepting that we have a DSAP teacher in a position. So when we have a DSAP teacher in a position, we continue to source for a fully certified teacher. So we look at hiring events, we post on hiring platforms with sign-on bonuses. We have a partnership with a local university as well. So yeah, we're not okay with it. We want to have certified teachers. We're trying to be competitive and try to do everything that we can do to try to bring teachers in. But the school setting that we work in is difficult work, right? It's difficult work. And so if we can utilize a DSAP and get them to love working with special ed kids, especially our special ed kids, because we love working with them, then that's what we're going to do while we still source for fully certified.
Thank you. And Representative Dave.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Gary, for answering a lot of my questions in advance. One of the things I was thinking about with student services, I know you talked about some of the difficulty you have with your student population. In terms of measuring your outcomes for students in the aggregate, do you do any sort of analytical work that you show how students have met their sort of PPT goals as part of their sort of work that they do with you all?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of that's the question that you're referring to is about tracking IEP progress. And so we do track IEP progress and how far students are progressing towards their IEP goals. We do that, on a system similar to the one I was talking about before, Student Central, where we input that in and everybody gets visibility. So from me down to my RDs, down to my directors, so we can look at that. But yeah, that's how we're tracking a lot of the progress on IEP goals. It's just by looking at it, again, principals are looking at it student to student. My RDs are looking at it school to school, and then I'm looking at it, over the course of the entire school system.
Great. That's very helpful to kind of see that overall oversight, if you will. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us on Zoom and providing that information.
Yeah, again, thank you. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. And then we have Alyssa from Meadowbrook.
Good afternoon, Senator Gadkar Wilcox, Senator McCrory, Representative Leeper, Representative Dathan, and honorable members of the Education and Government Oversight Committees. I'm Alicia Gadudi. I'm the president and CEO of Edelbrook Behavioral and Developmental Services. And with me is Alyssa Mullins, who directs our Cromwell Academy, and Fatima Silva, who's our assistant director for human resources. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you this afternoon about the auditor's report. As some of you may know, but I'll just give you a quick overview about who we are and what we do. Edelbrook is a multi-service agency specializing in serving those with autism spectrum disorders. We work with individuals with developmental challenges as well as behavioral health challenges. And we contract with Department of Children and Families, Department of Developmental Services, and 60 school districts. We support approximately 400 youth with highly complex behavioral and developmental needs and their families. We have special education programs that are approved private special education programs in Bloomfield, Manchester, Cromwell, and then we run a transitional program in Middletown. Our students represent nearly every community in Connecticut. Just an aside, in my personal life, I also serve as chair of our local board of education, so I do bring a unique perspective. New chair. Last year, I think I told you I was a member of the Board of Education. At Edelbrook, we provide highly specialized education and support services to meet the unique needs of children who need comprehensive wraparound supports. And that includes our amazing team of special educators, speech and language therapists, occupational therapists, board certified behavior analysts, RNs, LPNs, registered behavioral techs, therapeutic rec, and many other expert providers that really wrap their arms and their expertise and their hearts around the amazing students that we serve. Those that we serve come to us with among the most complex needs, and they're provided a 12-month comprehensive educational program. We consider ourselves a vital component and a partner in the continuum of care with our special education services within the districts. Our programs serve kids who have not been successful in public schools. Many of the children we serve have extensive trauma histories and they've experienced multiple hospitalizations. We help those students and their families find success after they've had many doors close on them. We give them a sense of community and help them make these huge educational gains that would not have happened without our programs. We provide the supports that they need to ultimately find achievement, dignity, happiness, and hope. We always appreciate the opportunity to improve our programs and appreciated getting to work with the auditors of public accounts to evaluate and look at the work that we had done in our Cromwell Academy in 2022 and 2023. In the auditor's report, you'll see that we specifically addressed and responded to all of the findings, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you today about some of the things that we've done subsequent to, and actually prior to, the auditor's report being published. In addition, we recently had an SDE evaluation of our Cromwell Academy, which was great timing because they reviewed with us every one of the findings in the auditor's reports and assured that we were fully compliant now in addressing all of their concerns. That just happened this past fall. We were granted a 4-year approval by the State Department of Education, and got to really work with them on some of the things that I think are missing in the auditor's report. And I talked to Dan and Joe quite extensively about this. They get to only point out areas where we are non-compliant by nature of their work, but we also got to show them all the great things that are happening in our schools. And you all don't get to hear that or read that in the report, but SDE does. So you got so excited about it that SDE does make a lot of efforts to provide not just feedback where they want us to improve, but also commendations. So in our last report, we had one area of corrective action around an older medication, but we had 2 pages of commendations. So in my written report, which I'll provide to all of you, we summarized just a few of the commendations. I think it's important for you to hear that perspective. So SDE noted that our leadership is strong, and I'm not just saying this because she's sitting next to me, but strong, responsive, highly interactive with our students, and fosters a sense of togetherness with our staff. Our program is welcoming and student-focused. Staff feel supported as a team, and they share the program's common mission and goal, which is grounded in core values of compassion, safety, trust, and expertise. Social and behavioral standards are consistently modeled by all of the staff. The school implements a continuum of care based on positive behavioral supports and teaches students responsibility, safety, and understanding of consequences. The program's professional development work was noted as a strength, and a collaborative and responsive effort towards improving student learning was noted. The program values collaboration and family engagement. School climate and culture were noted as a strength, as evidenced through the smiles, the humor, and the teachers providing students with constant encouragement and praise. And the team reported well-planned and rigorous instruction that was highly individualized, data-driven, multimodal, and appropriate to performance for each student, aligning with Connecticut core standards. So those are things that you all don't get to see, but SDE clearly comes in. They look at all of the things that we're doing great. They help us with areas where we could improve, and we really appreciate that partnership and collaboration. And I'm happy to share the full report that SDE just did if any of you would like to see what those look like or like to see ours in particular. With the findings that were noted for Edelbrook Academy Cromwell in the auditor's report, I'll tell you a little bit about, if I don't think I have a timer, a little bit about the specific findings. The one that was talked about most today around service delivery by the IEP. If you'd see, we came pretty darn close to hitting that 100%, but we work with kids who have behavioral challenges, and some days they do not want to go to that speech session. And other days they may be ready to go when it's not quite their turn. So if you see in the next finding, we got noted for over provision of certain areas of related services. And I credit that to our fantastic related services team, and kids just want to go visit them and be with them and have extra sessions. But in any of those cases, if we've underprovided or overprovided, we report that to the district, and we only bill based on services provided. So they're very aware. If there ever is a gap with a particular child, we are in constant communication with the district about what some of those barriers are and how we can fix them. Finding 3 on inconsistent contract quality and specificity. We have a person specifically in our agency who is our director of contracts. She's an attorney. She wrote a standard contract that we send out to all districts proactively. Most districts sign it and send it right back to us, and we have students come in with the contract in place. We also have to do these annually, so sometimes it's difficult to get the districts to send to students who are consistently with us because they're with us all summer and right through the school year. When districts have specific issues they want to address in the contract, then we negotiate that language with them. But we really try to be as proactive as we can in getting those contracts signed. Sometimes we don't kick kids out of school. If we don't get a contract, we don't say to that family or to that child, you can't come to school tomorrow. We try as hard as we can to find out why the district isn't signing it, if there's a barrier, if there was some maybe sent to a wrong email. But we don't tell kids they can't, well, we didn't. Now we're told by SD we probably should tell kids they can't come to school. But just historically and in 2022 and 2023, post-COVID, we weren't doing that. We were chasing down as best we could. Professional development, I'll just note, absolutely agree that our professional development tracking was done poorly. We have a brand new system, actually now 2 years old, maybe 2 years old, system that fully integrates our professional development with our human resource information systems. We still had people in our professional development system that were no longer with the agency. So they're not meeting their standard training requirements, clearly was going on forever because they were no longer with us. But now both of those systems are integrated into one, so that has been fully addressed. I think that was the bulk of the findings related to Edelbrook, but I can answer any other specific questions, or Alyssa or Fatima could. I will just share a couple pieces of outcome data because that also isn't in our report. But when we talk about our kids doing better because they're in our programs, Alyssa shared with me earlier this week that we have 8 students ready to go back to their home district because they were so successful with the interventions we put in place. We track data across our programs, and within 1 year of services, we're seeing 33% reduction in problem behavior. When that extends to 18 months, it goes down to 51% less concerning behaviors, which means kids are able to focus, they're able to learn better, and they're certainly able to participate in the community and with their family more successfully. I couldn't be prouder of the work that we do in our schools and in all of our programs. And I will also welcome any of you. I made this offer last year, and there's an open door. We have families that come in regularly. We have districts that can come in whenever they would like. Legislators, local officials, anybody that would like to come and see us, our students would love it. And they actually come here to meet all of you a couple times a year. So thank you for being so welcoming to them. And I'll leave it at that. And if you have any other specific questions, one of us should be able to answer.
Great. I just want to thank you so much for being here and for that presentation, all the information, and being so thorough. And it is good for you to highlight the things that we don't know about or reports that we haven't seen. And then let me give you another commendation, because the purpose of this committee was to do what we're doing here, which is for the auditors to highlight issues that need to be flagged, and then for us to, if there's for issues of public concern, to have these hearings. And it's so helpful when you have an explanation and you can tell us what corrective action is being taken, and you're clearly very proactive about addressing all of those issues. So it's the commendation is this is the model of how this committee was envisioned to work. So thank you very much for doing that, and for being so responsive to the auditor's report, and for letting us know that the corrective action that's been taken, and all the good work that you're doing on top of that. So very much appreciated. You actually, my questions were around what you're doing, so I don't have questions for you to ask. I think Representative Dathan.
Thank you so much. And really just want to commend you on all the work that you do. I saw in our 2023 5001 bill that we worked on how vital you are in providing services to those folks. You asked, or you answered a lot of my questions, but one question I had was regarding billing. And if you have a student who's dual diagnosed with autism and IDD, and they might be receiving some sort of speech therapy under services there, how do you determine what gets billed for like Medicaid purposes and what might be billed to SDE?
Hello, thank you. Alyssa Mullins, Director of Education at Cromwell Academy. We do not bill the State Department of Education. Go ahead.
Districts versus Medicaid programs. Sorry.
Okay, so our process really is through the direction of the LEA. They do require that our providers put all of their billing into CT SEDS for Medicaid purposes. We also have an internal system where our providers are plugging in their SOAP notes, their session notes into PowerSchool, which is a very well-known system for public schools as well. They plug in that system, all of their notes, so that administratively we can oversee and work together with our billing department to make sure that those things are matching up and that our districts are being billed correctly.
Great, thank you so much.
And then the district bills for Medicaid.
Okay, that's what I was kind of figuring, that that piece would get handled by the district then. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Are there any other questions from committee members? No. Great. Thank you very much for being here and for providing all that information. Okay, and I think I don't see anybody from the Bridgeport Public Schools there. I know there's a delegation meeting, so they might have been held up by that. And so our last speaker is from the Webb School. Good afternoon, turning into evening.
So thank you for having me come here today. So my name is Dr. Kiki Levin-Gardner, and I am the director for the Webb Schools. We are a nonprofit clinical day school, and we are approved by the State Department of Education. We work with students ages from the kindergarten all the way up to age 22. We service.
Can you, if you could sort of lean into the microphone a little bit more so we can hear. Thank you.
We service students with emotional issues, and they are psychological and psychiatric services being provided. Our clinicians are embedded in each and every program. In conjunction to our regular programs, we also offer specialty programs such as CREST, which is designed for students within the psychotic spectrum. We have an attendance recovery program, which is a program for students who are really struggling with coming to school. And therefore also, since especially after COVID, we have had many students struggling with attendance. So we at this point have an outreach team that go out to the house and work with the kids and the parents in their environment. And we also at that point transport them to school if we can convince them to come. So the Webb Schools mission reads in part that the Webb Schools continue to be open to advances in the fields of education and mental health. We are proud to continue the tradition of innovation and quality as we develop programs to support students, their families, and their school districts. I have the distinct honor of leading a team of over 80 of the most compassionate and skilled educators and providers a student could be assisted by. Our goal is to help students realize their potential and be assisted by. Our goal is to help students realize their potential and grow to be productive, independent, and responsible members of a diverse society. We work in tandem with their families and communities in a trauma-informed relational model, which has resulted in hundreds of students over the years returning to the public schools. I could not be prouder of the tremendous work we have done for the benefit of the most amazing students. As we teach our students, there is opportunity and growth around every corner. Over its 55 years, the Webb Schools at IOL has grown in direct response to new information, feedback, and self-reflection. The auditors took an exceptional amount of time and care to get to know our mission and community. And as such, we have taken every care to correct and modify our processes from their correct and modify processes from their thoughtful feedback. Thank you for helping us become even better. And at this point, I would also like to tell you stories or examples of successes. We had one student, elementary school student, who returned to public school and was exited out of special education. And we also had a student who returned to public school and was actually then received an award for being the student of the year in that district. So we do remarkable job and remarkable work with our students, and we tell parents and districts know this as well, that as soon as the student comes to our school, set their foot in the door, we will be working with them to try to get them back as soon as we possibly can. Therefore, we have a reputation of being the one school that actually returns students in a very timely manner. So talking about the findings. So the first finding delivers the services. We had at the time, as I mentioned before, difficulties after COVID to get our students back into the program. And we also had in the sample, unfortunately, many of our students that were chosen came from that attendance recovery program where they really struggled with coming to school, which of course had an effect on their service being provided. So we work very, very closely with districts and making sure that they are aware of what's going on, and there's no surprises. We are very transparent, and we are really putting our pride on having those relationships with our districts.
And can I just ask you on that? So you were saying that's unusual. So this, the percentage of services delivered here, that's 60% overall. Was that unusual based on that group? What is the service? What is the percentage delivered for most groups or the average?
So at that point, it was a little skewed because of that. I don't have the specific percentages, but I know that they were a little bit skewed because of that. It's not going to make a big difference. So the other issue that we were up against was that our documentation system was not really working the way it was designed. And we had to re-educate our clinicians to make sure that they fully put it in. We also changed it. So since they are embedded in the program, services are being provided all the time in different type of environments. And we have clarified all of those issues for them. And at this point, we are documenting everything, and we're putting in a date, a time, and the length of the meeting.
And given what you said about the nature of the students you're serving, is it that you can't necessarily can't necessarily deliver in terms of 100% services if you cannot ensure that the students, for whatever reason, are not willing to attend the scheduled meetings or to be available for the services? Is that I sort of heard from you that was part of the problem.
So at that point, the problem was that the documentation was not done as it should have been. So that is the difficulty. The other was, especially at that time, due to the attendance issues, it was difficult to make sure that we got all the makeup sessions in there. And yeah, so it was a multitude
combination.
of
Okay.
difficulties that came into it.
And I'm sorry, and what have you done to correct the documentation issue?
So we have changed the document itself, and now every time a clinician is meeting with a student, they are documenting the time and length and date of and the nature of that encounter.
Thank you.
In regards to the contracts and so forth, I think that was something that was universal for all of us, and we would really appreciate to collaborate with the State Department of Education to come up with a model contract. It would make life easier for all of us. When it comes to the background checks and criminal background and DCF and so forth, all of those have been also corrected, and we now have recurring background checks. So that is scheduled. We have worked very closely with HR to help them come up with procedures and policies and so forth around the background checks to make sure that they are actually done. And that goes, of course, also with the employer verification forms. In regards to the seclusion room mechanism, we had one door that had, so we have a latch that goes up under, so it only stays up as long as you hold it, and then it falls down. And at that point, we had one door that must have been smashed somehow and was not fully functional all the time. What we now have is a sheet, so there are daily checks after each time a room has been used. And luckily, we don't have very many restraint or seclusions, so that is less of a problem, but it is.
I was going to ask, how often do they get used? Was that part of the oversight? How often do those rooms get used?
So last month, I believe we had across the school probably 5 seclusions.
For the whole month?
For the whole month.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think, and that speaks also highly to our trauma-informed care that we are providing and the relationships that we build with our students. So compliance with work references is also an HR issue, and which has been addressed. As during the audit, we made sure that as soon as we heard about the deficiency, we immediately started working on corrective actions. The non-compliance with emergency drill, we have put in now a space for specifically just for feedback as well. And the professional development, we had the wording 18 hours was not in our policy, so we put that in there. We also now are making sure that everybody sign in and sign out during those in person and the administrators are continuing to take notice and mark everyone who is attending virtually when that happens. And in 22-23, that was the case, that most of them were virtual. And questions?
That's great. But thank you so much for being here and providing that information on what you're doing to respond to the audit. Let me see if my co-chair.
Just
Representative Daith?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Similar question to what I asked Edelbrook in terms of how you track your sort of students that might be eligible for Medicaid in receiving some of the services that you do, because some of them are Medicaid eligible line items.
Yeah, so we provide them as well in CTSED and use their platforms to provide the information. And so that's kind of the process for us.
Okay, great. So then the districts would go ahead and apply for the reimbursement.
Absolutely.
Okay, got it. So thank you so much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Dathan. Any other questions from our committee members? Nope, I don't see any. Nope. Thank you very much for
Thank
being
you.
here.
And I hope to see also some of you come and visit us. We would welcome that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that concludes our hearing for today. So thank you to everyone for being here, for all the information that you provided. And enjoy the rest of the week.